who owns this car. My F80 M3 has been stored in his garage the entire time. It's been sitting under the lifts, under his S2000, and I am reluctantly handing back the GT3. What I wanted to do in this video, I guess, is just kind of, do an exit interview, kind of wrap up my conclusions about this car. I know I've been doing a lot of Porsche content lately, but it truly has been such an amazing experience. And I kind of want to share that with you guys. I wanted to kind of just walk you through the whole journey with me, because I mentioned it before, this was an absolute dream come true. It's not very often that you really get to drive one of these, but practically own one for an extended period of time. This is like a extended test drive, if you will. They always say that a 5-10 minute test drive at a dealership, or if you're buying a car privately, you can never really tell if it's the right car for you in 5 to 10 minutes. So what I tend to do is I like to try and test drive cars for a long time to really see if it's something that I really want to chase. And I didn't have any doubt that the GT3 was something that I wanted. I mean, I know myself. I know the car. I know what it would feel like. But really getting behind the wheel of this thing and driving it and, you know, putting it through its courses and just really, really driving the car, it has far exceeded my expectations. This car is beyond anything that I ever imagined. Unfortunately, my experience is with a 991.2 manual, which is a very, very sought-after spec. And because it's sought after, they are very, very expensive. But something I mentioned in my last video, the Wash and Talk, was that it completely changed my course, my mindset, completely changed it, my priority, my car journey. And what I meant by that was that it has made me realize that I don't think I'm going to stop until I have a GT3 in my garage. And I don't know if that's going to be tomorrow. I don't know if that's going to be, 2 months from now or 2 years from now. I'm going to be focused and driven to get that GT3. And I'm seriously hoping that it's a 991.2 manual, this exact spec. Different color though, although the white is absolutely beautiful. I am 100% motivated and focused on getting myself a GT3. It's going to be hard, it's going to be a lot of work, but I'll tell you what, it is worth every single penny. Now, if you ever had the opportunity to drive a Porsche or own one, whatever, you guys just get it immediately. You understand what these cars are all about. Now, I obviously didn't take it on the track and race it or anything like that, but just around town and driving on the street and everything and finding some really nice back roads, it's really easy to tell what these cars are all about. And they truly live up to the hype. It's not just something that people are all like, oh, I want to get that car because of the badge and, the status. It's just an incredible driver's car. And thankfully, I've driven a few Porsches. I've driven a 997, a 2006 997 Carrera S. I've driven a Carrera T, now the GT3. I would like to try like a GTS, 991.2 GTS, because that is like a baby GT3 basically. I also want to try GT4, 981 GT4 more specifically. I also would really like to get some experience in a 992. I don't care the generation, a Carrera S, even just a base Carrera I'll be fine with. I think it would be interesting to drive that one after I've driven this one. To me, I feel like the 991.2 is like the F80 as it is to the G80. The 991.2 is kind of the old tech with new tech combined, where the 992 is just a little bit more modernized. I don't want to say digitized and game-like, but that's just kind of how cars go. As they progress, they get a little bit more digitized and a little bit more automated. I feel like the 991.2 is the generation to get. But I don't know, man. I think any generation GT3 is fantastic. Now, funny enough, I've already planned out a mod list for this car. Kind of got some things together that I would like to do to one, and it's actually pretty similar to Jeff's modification journey, the things that he put on this car. And the funny thing is, I guess it's not funny, but the crazy thing is, to get this car to where I would want it is drastically cheaper than how much I put into the F80 M3. You know, this is, you know, you would think a GT3, a Porsche, would be super expensive with all the modifications you would want to do. But what I've found is that these cars are just so good from the factory that not much is needed. But now, I'm not saying the F80 isn't good from the factory, but there's definitely a few areas on that car that do need to be upgraded and kind of, you know, made a little bit better. And that's what I did with my F80. I made a very good car into a very, very good car with the things that I've done. You know, some things are just kind of cosmetic, like the front lip and all that stuff, but overall, it's a better driving car for what I've done to it. But I've spent nearly 3 times the cost in modifications on the F80 M3 than I would spend on this. You know, there's really not much that you have to do on here, which is a good thing, and that appeals to me as I get older. The OEM Plus mindset has always been with me, kind of, that's the way I modify my cars, and the idea of not having to do so much to a car is really appealing. I don't know if it's just because I'm getting older and I can appreciate certain cars more, or it's just the type of cars that I'm kind of getting into and eventually owning and everything. So I don't know what it is, but you know, the appeal of not having to spend as much to get it to my spec is really, really nice. And it's crazy. I was, you know, I made my mod list, I put a shopping cart together and everything, and I was like, what? Really? That's all? Previous cars, the aftermarket support was really important because it kept my interest in those cars. But I feel like with the GT3, like, it's so good that you just do a few things and you can just enjoy the crap out of this car, because it's just so good, man. Anytime I do these videos in this car, you know, talking while I'm driving, it's so hard to really say anything, because it's the only thing that I can think of is that it's just so good. It's so good. It's hard to find the words. It's almost leaving me speechless about how good this car is. And I've talked to a few other friends and everything about different cars and different generations and everything. And everybody, all my good friends that I talk to that own Porsches or own, you know, BMWs, M cars and everything, and move to GT cars and all that, and they honestly say, if you're going to get one, get a 991.2 manual. That is the car to get. It's going to be a keeper. You know, make sure you get what you want and not just kind of get cars to get cars. You know, just wait, be patient, you know, and the time will come. And I'm trying my best to do that, and I'm hoping I can get there. Hoping I can get there really soon. So one thing I will say, this car gets so much attention, it's crazy, both good and bad. Everywhere I go, no matter if they're, you know, a kid or they're, you know, a grown adult, it gets so much attention. Thumbs up, people ask me to rev it, you know, just compliments left and right. It's being a car enthusiast, I'm not gonna lie, it's really, really cool. It's really fun to kind of, you know, have people realize that and understand what this car is. Because to most people, to non-car enthusiasts, it's just a Porsche. You know, they don't really understand it's you know, what this car actually is. But it's pretty amazing, the attention that it gets. And for it really not looking crazy exotic like a Lamborghini or something, I was blown away about the actual attention that it gets. Every single person you pass, they always look and break their necks. It's crazy. Not to mention the exhaust on this thing is amazing. But everywhere you go, it's just, you hear it coming. You know, just having this car for the week, and my wife is like, you know, I've gone out for drives and stuff, miles and miles away, and she texts me and she's like, I hear you from here. And I'm talking like miles away, almost a different town. It's pretty insane. I couldn't help but laugh because, you know, the car is just simply that loud. You know, that snap and crack on the downshifts and everything, it's so good. And I found myself just going through the gears way more often than you probably should, just because I loved hearing it. It's such a good sound. And I'll be honest, I honestly don't think that I'll ever drive a car that gives me this feeling and this overall excitement until I get one of these cars. I'm hoping that the F80 M3, you know, when I get back in it, it's gonna give me like, okay, this is pretty good. I can enjoy this a little bit longer, kind of thing. I hope it's not like, oh, this stinks, I'm getting a GT3 tomorrow, because I don't know if I can do it tomorrow. I'll try. I'll find a way if it really comes down to it, but it's just good, guys. It's just simply good. Now, I'm actually excited to get my F80 back. I still love that car. I think it's an amazing car for the value. I'm still going to enjoy it. I'm still going to modify it and make videos on it and everything. I don't want you guys thinking that I'm done with that car by any means. I am not. I love that car, and I'm actually really looking forward to getting it back and seeing what I think after driving this car for a week. You know, I'm really curious to see how the shifting feels, how the overall performance feels. It's one thing to drive one car and then like a year or two later drive another car. So I kind of wanted to experience this back to back. You know, I'm driving the GT3 right now, and then I'm driving, you know, all the way back in my F80. So it's going to give me a good representation of the two cars. Now, I'm not here to say I'm going to be comparing an F80 M3 to a 991.2 GT3. It's just two different cars. But I'm just curious to kind of figure out what I think now. You know, because I before this, I love the F80 M3. I think it's a great car, and I don't think that's going to change, but I'm really curious to see what I think. You know, is it really muted? Is it dull? Is it still as fast as I remember? Because as I mentioned in my driving video, that the GT3 actually feels a little bit slower than the F80. Very two different types of motors and types of cars. NA, forced induction, you know, it's a very different experience, but still, it feels faster overall. I mean, it makes sense. It's pushing nearly 600 horsepower, whereas this is 500 even. Very different, but I'm still really curious to hear what he thinks. So I got about, let's see, about 40 minutes left in the drive. I'm just going to enjoy it. I've been driving this car super hard all week long, so I'm just kind of cruising, enjoying the ride, and to be honest, taking my time because I don't want to return the car. I want to drive it as long as possible. I don't want to race there and have to give it up even sooner. So I'll update you guys once I get back in the F80 and we're driving home and everything, and kind of talk through it, see what I think, and you know, maybe we'll come to some conclusions on the way home, because it's about an hour drive or so. And yeah, so I'm going to enjoy this drive, the one last drive all the way back, and I'll catch back up with you guys in a little bit. All right, guys, so as you can tell, different clothes, and I'll be honest, it is quite a few days later. And there's a couple reasons why I decided to wait. One of which, by the time that I got the car and my buddy Jeff and I were talking and everything, it was just too dark and the lighting would have been terrible. So obviously, because of that reason, I decided to hold out. And also a second reason, I felt that comparing a GT3 to an F80 M3 back to back is a little unfair. I mean, as I mentioned, I don't want to compare these two cars. I just wanted to kind of express what was going through my mind after driving a car like that. Like, did the F80 M3 still feel as good as I remembered it after driving a car like that? So what I decided to do was actually wait a few days. It's actually been almost a full week since I've dropped the GT3 off, and I've been driving the F80 M3 ever since. And the reason why I wanted to do that was simply just to kind of get myself back in the F80 mindset. I did write some notes down, or make a mental note of what I was feeling when I got the F80 after the GT3. So right off the bat, as soon as I got into the M3, there was a couple things that were really prominent. One, the pedal feel of the clutch and the brake pedal. Now, they did feel really good, but they felt extremely light. And I never really felt that the GT3's pedals were heavier feeling, but I just felt like they were almost made of plastic. You know, going through the motions, braking, putting the clutch in and everything, they felt, I don't want to say cheaper, but they just felt different, which is kind of expected getting into a completely different car. But I was surprised at the very, very light feel in the F80 M3 after the GT3. Now, BMWs are kind of known for their very light clutch and the pedal feel and everything. It's a little bit different than most. So I don't know. I don't know what I was expecting, but getting back into it, I was shocked about how it felt. Also, the driving position, while I do sit fairly low with the Recaros, I sat even lower in the GT3 carbon buckets, which I actually prefer. I'm actually even considering lowering the Recaros just one more notch to get to that height. Although it's in a pretty good position currently, so I don't know if I want to mess with it. But another thing that I noticed right away was just how quiet the M3 is. Now, it is pretty loud. When you have the valves open and you're on it and everything, cold start, it's a very loud car, don't get me wrong. But compared to the GT3, pretty much a fully straight piped Acura exhaust sounds incredible. 9,000 RPMs. This goes up to 7,500. Turbo, NA, so two very different sounding cars. But I just was like, I can't believe how quiet the F80 sounds in comparison, which is a good thing though, because I don't think the S55, the F80, F82s sound good extremely loud. For me, I think the S55 sounds better. A little bit quieter, not at full tilt, not the loudest possible option you can go with. I do think they sound better with the right exhaust, which I personally think mine sounds very, very good for what it is. You know, I've been through quite a few, as you guys know, but definitely a huge difference in sound, which I obviously expected. This thing sounds like a Cadillac in comparison. It's so crazy. I mean, even right now, I'm sure just the volume in the cabin is very, very different. In the GT3, watching those clips back, you can hear just how loud the overall exhaust is, and which is a good thing, because in a fun car, I want a loud exhaust. Another thing that I was pretty surprised about was this car is much harder to control. And what I mean by that is driving the car at full tilt, you know, going through the back roads, how I was with the GT3 on my first video with the car. You know, I was pinning that car, driving it very, very hard. I can't do that with this. I don't know what it is. I guess it's just the torque between the gears and everything, but if I really just try to rip on this car, like right now, it pulls the rear end out, which is fun in its own way. But when you want to have some fun and just really kind of put the hammer down and enjoy the turns and everything, I mean, it's kind of no question the G3 is going to eat it alive. But I find myself modulating this car more on the gas than I was with the GT3. The GT3 I can just pin down and just drive and modulate a little bit, whereas the M3 I have to make sure I am really, really focused on the power, the gear, and what kind of turns are coming up, because if I took this car on the same roads and the same conditions, I would not be driving nearly as hard, which is good in its own way, obviously keeping me safe and everything. But you know, that is definitely something I noticed. You know, this just feels a lot harder to control when you're kind of driving it at full tilt. This car is much harder to drive smooth. One of the things I mentioned in my wash and talk was that you can just get in a GT3 and drive it like you've been driving it for years. It's a very easy car to drive. Everything is right where it should be. There's no guessing about everything. It's just, it really feels right. And with the F80, it does feel similar. But when you get in this car, and if you haven't driven an M3 or BMW transmission, manual transmission in general, it can be a little tricky because first and second gear is pretty jolty and jerky. When I tuned in everything, it does help a little bit, but it's much harder to drive this car smooth. The GT3, it made me feel like a race car driver, a professional driver. It's very easy to drive those cars really smooth. The clutch point on the GT3 is much more user-friendly. You know, there's such a small gap in the M3 clutch that if you miss it, you're bucking around and kind of all over the place. With the GT3, it's a lot more forgiving and a lot easier to drive if you're just getting into it. So definitely something I noticed. Even driving the M3 for over a year, I had some trouble getting back into it and getting used to it. Whereas the GT3, I got in it and I felt like I've been driving it for years. Now, this kind of goes without saying, you can definitely feel the weight of the F80 M3 in comparison. I mean, that's no question. You're driving a sports sedan, whereas the GT3 is just a purebred track race car for the street. Two doors, just feels way more nimble, not to mention the rear wheel steering on the GT3, pretty amazing. I mean, that's to be expected, but it's something I noticed. You know, you just can't throw this around as easily, in my opinion. The GT3, you can just take any turn in the GT3 and it just holds you, whereas this, again, you kind of have to modulate the throttle pedal and making sure you're in the right gear and everything, because if you add too much throttle, you can definitely loop out and get yourself into some trouble. So you can definitely feel the weight. Not that it's a bad thing, but it's definitely something I noticed after switching to this car. So after driving probably the best car I've ever driven in my entire life, what are the good things? You know, I feel like I've just been saying bad things about it, and don't get me wrong, this car is very, very good. I mean, for the cost of these cars, you get a ton of car. So there's no question about it if this car is good or not. But let's start going over the things that are good about this car that I noticed immediately after jumping back into this. The first thing is this car is incredibly fast. Much faster than the GT3, which I mentioned in my videos with the Porsche. There's no question this thing is just an absolute rocket. Granted, this car is modified, tuned, you know, I got downpipes on here and everything, so it's an absolute beast. and this thing rips through the tires pretty much all the way to third gear. So there's no question that the M3 feels faster off the line and just kind of ripping through the gears. I mean, obviously on the track and going through corners and everything, the GT3 would probably probably pull away, although this would stay pretty close. Again, this is a fantastic car for the money, but this car just feels like an absolute animal. Now, this may contradict to what I was saying earlier about this car feeling very or much harder to control. This does feel very, very composed, especially with the suspension that I do have on the car, which is KWV through coilovers. I do have them tuned to dampened to my preference, which is pretty firm. Out of the box, they're a little soft, which is good for a daily. But what I use this car for, I much prefer it a little bit stiffer. And this car feels very composed. There's no body lean. It feels very, very planted and straight through turns. There's no question that this thing can hold its own when you're really pushing it through the paces, which is really nice to think that, a $150,000 to $200,000 car compared to, a $50,000 to $60,000 car here can definitely hold its own. Now, obviously I'm comparing a stock suspension to aftermarket suspension, but take it for what it's worth. Another thing that's awesome about this car, as soon as you hop in it, it feels luxurious, it feels comfortable, you have everything you can possibly want. I've got back seats, which is really nice. It's just a really great all-around car. So if you really need something that's fun, that can hold a lot of power, that's really great handling, and you need something that's comfortable for every single day, it's got all the amenities you could possibly want. I mean, the F80 is hard to beat. I get it, the GT3 does have some really nice stuff, but I mean, you get in this thing and you're like, wow, this feels really, really nice. Now, the last point I want to make, this thing looks amazing. I still think to this day, this is the best looking sedan, sports sedan that has ever come out from any manufacturer ever. This thing looks so good. It's hard to deny that. It just looks so aggressive. It has that bulldog stance with the really wide fenders. The way that my car is sitting on the T's and everything, super low, and it just looks so good. Even when I dropped the GT3 off, Jeff pulled the M3 out, was sitting in the driveway, and I was like, damn, that thing looks sick. But there's absolutely no doubt that the F80 M3 looks incredible, and I'm happy to say that it still looks really good to me. I thought it was going to be tainted by the beautiful GT3 looks, but the F80 still looks really good to me. All right, guys, so that is gonna do it for the GT3 back to the F80 comparison, I guess, if you want to call it. I enjoyed my time in the GT3 immensely, but the F80 M3 is fantastic. There's no doubt about it. I don't want you guys thinking I'm downplaying this car, because this car, it truly is amazing. And if you guys are interested in probably one of the best bang for your buck cars, I don't think there's a question that the F80 M3 is it. I mean, for 50 to 60 grand, depending on the spec and everything that you want, this is really, really hard to beat. But it goes without saying that if you have the means and the ability to get a GT3, you can't go wrong with that. The GT3 is an amazing car, and I think it's a great progression going from an M3 to the GT3 or some type of 911 of some variant. But yeah, so at this point, I know I'm pretty back and forth on what I want to do. I did kind of loosely list this for sale because I am interested in pursuing a GT3. So if anybody is interested in this car, shoot me a DM on Instagram. Only serious buyers, please. Don't just reach out and say, I'm curious. Somebody that's actually interested in purchasing this car, let me know. I'll be more than happy to discuss on Instagram. We can go over the details and everything. But that is going to do it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. That is it for the Porsche and GT3 content. We are jumping back onto the F80 M3 content. I got a bunch of stuff coming, so stay tuned for that. But as for this one, if you guys have any questions at all, be sure to ask them below. But in the meantime, keep it clean, keep it simple, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.